Owning your role in your employee empowerment can create a how culture that supports employees spending their energy on enhancing their performance, not creating excuses for work not done.
Leaders do not waste time pointing fingers or blaming or making excuses. They own the situations that they help create.
Accountability always starts with me, right? You don't go out and attack other people. You always start with yourself first and realize you're not a victim. You can make a difference with the things around you, always.
Welcome to the Inside Forbes Councils podcast. Each episode shares transformative insights and advice from members of Forbes Councils, a group of invitation-only communities for successful executives and entrepreneurs. Today we have 3 members of Forbes Councils who are going to help us all be more accountable. We'll be joined by Gary Bradt of Bradt Leadership, Lynda Reid of Kusala, and Don Markland of Accountability Now. Accountability. It's something that is discussed often as an admirable trait. But what is accountability?
I recall a TV commercial that was on a few years back. Some little boys are out playing baseball, and crash! A ball flies through the window of a nearby house. All the little boys scatter, except for one. He looks around, his head on a swivel, watches his friends run away. Then he looks back at that broken window, and he looks at the house, and he resolutely begins to walk towards the front door. And the commercial ends with him reaching out his finger to ring the doorbell. That's what accountability looks like. And that's why in the workplace, I say accountability starts with a good, long, hard look in the mirror.
That's Gary Bradt, a keynote speaker on change and leadership and a member of the Forbes Coaches Council.
I think there's 3 components that you need for accountability: awareness, self-responsibility or self-ownership, and courage. Let's start with awareness. You can't be held accountable for something of which you are not aware, or something that you can't see or don't know. Now, a broken window is obvious, but sometimes at work things aren't quite so obvious. For example, are you meeting customer expectations? Well, how do you know? Are you delivering on the promises that your team has promised to customers or clients? How do you know? You have to go out and get data. You need to go talk to people. You need to do surveys. You need subjective and objective data, not just assume that what you're doing is working. So the best leaders are always asking the best questions. Am I meeting your expectations? How can we do better? Are we delivering the results we promised, etc.? They listen and then they ask follow-ups. So that's step number 1 to accountability is awareness. Step 2 is self-ownership. Leaders do not waste time pointing fingers or blaming or making excuses. They own the situations that they help create. For example, a couple of years ago, I was working with an executive, and her executive assistant, her EA, had sent out a communication that she was not supposed to send out, and it appropriately and understandably upset a lot of people. My executive immediately sprang into action, not by reprimanding her EA, but by staying up almost all night writing personal correspondences to all of the people who had received the message, explaining why it was an error, not blaming the EA, explaining what she really meant to say and communicate to them. And she even got on a plane a few weeks later to go visit with somebody who was particularly upset. That's what being self-responsible and self-accountable looks like. It doesn't mean she let her EA off the hook, but she knew her EA was a very talented person who had made a mistake, and she dealt with that appropriately. But my executive did not spend time pointing fingers or blaming anybody else, because that's step 2 to accountability is self-responsibility. And the third step to accountability is courage. Being accountable in everything sounds great in theory, but in practice, it can take some courage. It can take some guts. For example, in that little scenario, for that little boy to go ring the doorbell, he had to be afraid to do that. And you are going to experience fear sometimes in taking responsibility for what has happened. And that's okay. What you have to do is be afraid and do the right thing anyhow. Most people will admire you and respect you and follow you more because of that, rather than if you point the fingers or try to pretend you had nothing to do with it. Now, some people are naturally courageous. The rest of us, we've got to learn. And being courageous, by the way, doesn't mean there's an absence of fear. I don't see how you could be courageous if you have no fear. Being courageous means you're afraid and doing the right thing anyhow.
So to recap,
Number one, it starts with a good hard look in the mirror and being aware of what results you're getting. And if they're not up to snuff, that goes to number two, which is taking self-responsibility rather than blaming or pointing the fingers at others. Doesn't mean that you don't hold others accountable, but you always start with yourself. And three, sometimes it's hard because it's hard. And that requires just a little bit of courage, which is something that with practice you can get better and better at.
what if you're not the one who made a mistake, though? What if you're a leader managing a team? Where does accountability lie?
Consider for a moment one of your employees who you feel frequently underperforms. How frustrated are you by the excuses they have for not meeting their deadlines? Do their excuses always shift the blame to others and neatly put the control out of their hands? What you may not realize is their responses have a lot to do with how their brains are wired for self-preservation. And often, their responses have a lot to do with you.
That's Dr. Lynda Reid of Kusala. She's an international, professionally certified coach, author, and speaker.
To shift your leadership interactions from excuse promoting to accountability and performance enhancement, it's essential that you begin with understanding just a little neuroscience. When you ask your employee why something is not done, you trigger their amygdala, part of their brain's threat response system, placing their brain in a fight or flight mode. Their brain automatically responds to protect, triggering an unconscious response that makes it hard for them to think clearly. Blame and excuses are an easy way out. To assist your employees in creating avenues to rectify and avoid problem situations, consider the following three strategies of why, how, and what. First, stop asking why. When you ask questions like, why did you, or why didn't you, you place your employee's brain in the threat state. Threat opens the door for excuses and for your employee to blame others. It takes a high degree of emotional regulation for any person to shift their brain out of an automatic threat response to react in a way that fosters new ideas and opportunities for resolutions. As a leader, you can assist your employees in regulating their emotions and responding with ownership and solutions by shifting your response by using the second strategy of how. It's all about how you word things and the tone in which you speak. State the situation in a neutral tone as a simple fact. The issue is not why it has happened, it's about how to move forward. As you address the situation without heightened emotion, you quiet your employee's brain threat response and the need to find excuses and blame others. When you ask how questions, such as, how can this situation be resolved? How can we move beyond this challenge? How questions allow your employees to go into problem solving rather than blame. Problem solving creates new actions and avenues to change behaviors that lead to further accountability. Owning your role in your employee empowerment can create a how culture that supports employees spending their energy on enhancing their performance, not creating excuses for work not done. You can take your employee empowerment even further with the third strategy of what. One of the best places to open the door to employee empowerment is by asking the employee, what can be done to improve and support your success? What do you need to enhance your performance? Listen, then act on what you learn. As a leader, it's crucial to ask yourself, what supports can I put in place that will allow these employees and others to expand their potential? Consider your entire employee experience, the big picture, from the interview process to your onboarding process and your ongoing performance management strategies. How can performance challenges be not only resolved, but prevented in the first place? Your employee performance issues may have more to do with your company culture than any individual employee. Remember, shifting an underperforming employee from blame to accountability begins with how you ask them questions. Changing why questions to how questions prevents the employee's brain from immediately shifting into that threat state and moves their thinking into problem-solving mode. When the employee takes ownership of problem solving, they can see their way forward, allowing them to create a path for accountability and action steps for improving their performance. Asking what questions allows you to gain insights into more systemic issues that really need to be addressed. Use your employee performance issues as an opportunity to reflect on your company culture and what you can proactively do to adapt and enhance your employee performance and success.
So, you've got to admit you broke the window. If you're a leader, the buck stops with you. Knowing where fault lies and standing up and taking responsibility is one thing. But how do we practice being more accountable in our day-to-day actions?
I developed this method called the 4 C's of accountability.
That's Don Markland, the CEO and founder of Accountability Now.
It really starts with 2 base rules. The first rule is accountability always starts with me, right? You don't go out and attack other people. You always start with yourself first and realize you're not a victim. You can make a difference with the things around you, always. And there's this Hall of Fame quarterback named Steve Young who used to tell this story that early in his career, when he would throw interceptions, that the receiver would tip it or drop it, and that's what caused the interception. He used to go after that receiver with everything he had. He'd yell at him and he'd scream at him and all these things. And the receiver in kind would get defensive and argue back. And that created conflict. Later in his career, he realized when he had those same situations happen, he would speak to the receiver and start it with, hey, that's my fault. Hey, man, I should have seen if you were looking. I threw it too hard, you name it. And he was genuine about it. And because of that, the defensiveness never arose. And the two of them were able to find resolution and a pathway forward. Right? And so remember, accountability always starts with yourself. It's going to create less conflict in your life as well as help you find better results. The second rule is there are no egos in accountability. None. Anybody can hold you accountable. They don't have to have a certain title. They don't have to have a certain stature. Right? And I relate it with a sports analogy. You think about in baseball, if the pitcher throws the pitch and you swing and you miss, that is a strike. And it doesn't matter if the umpire calls it a strike or the opposing player calls it a strike or a fan in the stands calls it a strike. It doesn't matter because a strike is still a strike, no matter who calls it out. Now, onto the 4 C's. The first C is critique success. And this simply means do it better every time. I want you to imagine you're hiking up a mountainside or something and you get to the very top of the mountain. Well, now there's only one place to go, and that is back down, right? And so critique success means you never reach the top. You always raise the bar. So the minute you win, the minute you do something really well, before you sit there and get all excited, stop in the moment of happiness and critique it while it's most fresh and find a way to do it better. The second one is correct failure. And this means take more risks, right? Measure your risks, push them. If you're an entrepreneur, an executive, a leader, a parent, you're going to make a lot more failures than you do successes in your life. Stop trying for perfection. Just go. Make better decisions, make quicker decisions. And when you have failures, which you will, correct them. Don't punish them. The third one is celebrate growth. When you do something hard or that's out of your comfort zone and it really pushes you, that's when you celebrate. That's when you reward it. And I mean celebrate to the point of awkwardness, right? Get on tables, sing, dance, eat great desserts. I don't care. But you really make a big deal when you do something hard, because that's where real growth occurs. And people ask me all the time, they're like, Don, why would you celebrate growth and not celebrate success? And it's really easy when you look at it this way. Every one of us, every human on this planet is expected to be successful, right? It doesn't mean we're all going to be billionaires, but we're expected to be successful in our relative spheres. So why would we ever celebrate meeting expectations? You wouldn't. You wouldn't at all. And that's what leads to entitlement. Don't celebrate when you do what you're expected to do. Celebrate when you do the hard thing, when you put more weight on the bar, right? That's what really makes you powerful. Last one, the best one, is crush mediocrity, right? Crush it, right? Every one of us are infected with mediocrity, and it's just dying to seep out. And when it does, you have to crush it with everything you've got, just like you would a bug. Because if you don't, more mediocrity comes and more mediocrity comes, and it infects people around you. It's terrible. You crush mediocrity every chance you get. Now look, those 4 C's and those 2 rules, I'll be honest, they changed my life. And you never actually achieve all of them, right? You're always trying to live them every single day. And I've watched it impact myself. I've watched it impact other people, and now people all over the world through our program, right? And I strongly encourage you, even if you just listen to this content, is to absorb it and think about it and start to hold yourself more accountable. And remember, you can't do it alone. Every one of us need that, what we call a key accountability partner, a CAP, in our life. And if you get that in the form of a coach, that's great. If you get that in the form of different partners, that's great. But just remember that your ability to hold yourself accountable will make you your best version of yourself.
I'd like to thank Gary, Lynda, and Don for their contributions to the show. Be sure to look up, connect, and follow our guests. You can find Gary Bradt at garybradt.com, Dr. Lynda Reid at crusalallc.com, and connect with Don Markland on social media. His handle is @DonMarkland. That's all we have time for today. If you're not a member of one of Forbes Councils and are interested in joining, go to ForbesCouncils.com to see if you qualify. Thank you for listening. Please be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.